Hey, what's up everyone? Here's a video to help you with some tips on terminology when referring to the Indigenous community in Canada and the United States. So this is a question I get asked a lot. People, want to talk about the Indigenous community, want to talk to people who are in the Indigenous community, and they're not really sure what words to use. They don't want to be offensive, so they just won't say anything or they won't ask any questions. I don't think that's a really great way to go about it. So I'm hoping to empower you if you have these questions so that you can feel safe referring to the Indigenous community in a way that is inclusive and respectful and not offensive, because I think that that's a very common concern that people have. So first off, globally, this is a word that you've already heard me use a lot in my other videos, is the word Indigenous. I've traveled all over the world, I've worked all over the world, and if you're in South America, if you're in North America, if you're in Australia, if you're in New Zealand, if you're, any place with Indigenous communities, if you use the word Indigenous from a very high level, that's seen as a respectful word to use. Now, the more specific you get with people within the Indigenous community, obviously it shows a little bit more knowledge and it's more respectful because the Indigenous community is a very diverse community. So I'm going to start off with talking about Canada first, the United States second, and then I will also talk a little bit about words to stay away from depending on the region that you're in. So first off, in Canada, so the word most commonly used nationally is Aboriginal. We have National Aboriginal Day every year on June 21st, National Aboriginal History Month every year in Canada is in June. But it's also important to remember that the Aboriginal community, or that term Aboriginal, actually encompasses three separate cultural groups, namely the First Nations community, the MAHSI community, and the Inuit community. Now, the First Nations community is also an incredibly diverse community. So the more respect you want to convey, the more specific you'll get to either their region or their cultural group. So in Canada, in the First Nations community, we have over 52 separate and distinct language groups. We have over 600 different First Nations communities, bands or reserves across Canada. Now, you can do the math, and that would be able to tell you that there are a number of different communities or bands that are members of the same cultural group. So I am Dene. There are many Dene communities in Canada, or Dene reserves in Canada. I grew up beside a Cree First Nation for most of my life. There are also many other Cree communities in Canada. So we tend to refer to ourselves as our language group or our cultural group, and then we'll refer to ourselves by the territory, either by the treaty or the traditional territory where our community is from. So if you have an idea of where that person is from or where they grew up, you can maybe ask, were you in a Métis community or a Cree community? Like, if you have an idea of the history of that region. Generally, it's safe to start off, if you know that they're Aboriginal, asking them if they're First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, and then you can get a little bit more specific from there. Now, this is a common question. What are the words that I'm not allowed to use? Well, first off, the answer is it depends, and it depends on where you are and who you're talking to. So from a very high level, I hope this is a little bit helpful, because these are the two most common words I get asked about a lot. So the first is tribe. In the United States, that is a word that is commonly used when people talk about who they are or where they're from. They're a member of the Navajo tribe from this region. In Canada, that's not a word that we use, so I wouldn't recommend using it. Indian in the United States, what I've been told through conversations with friends and with people who are in the community here, is that it's more of a generational thing. So people of the older generation tend to use the term American Indian, and they're totally fine, referring to themselves as American Indian, or that they're a part of Indian country. I've also been told that people of the younger generation tend to prefer the term Native American. So I've put both a check mark and a question mark there because I think it really depends. If you want to err on the side of safety, I would just say Native American is the best term to use there. In Canada, though, we never really use that word. So the only time you'll hear me use that word is if I'm referring to something like the Indian Act or a specific piece of legislation or history that uses that word. Moving on to the United States. So in the United States, broadly speaking, we have the Native American community, the Alaska Natives, and the Native Hawaiian. So even if you just think about geographically how dispersed these regions are, naturally you can think there would be more diversity and that they'd have different cultural backgrounds or cultural groups. So in referring to people, if you know that they grew up in Hawaii and that they're Indigenous, referring to them as like Native Hawaiian and then maybe asking them more about their community is the more respectful way to go about it. Also in the United States, a very large and also incredibly diverse community. So there are 567 federally recognized tribes in the United States. There are even more state recognized tribes and even more non-officially recognized tribes in the United States. So it's an incredibly diverse community from east to west, north to south. While people will often, refer to themselves by their language group as well, saying that they're Navajo, they're Sioux, or they're Anishinaabe. What I've heard a lot is people using the region, so that they're from the Southwest, they're from the Great Plains, they're from the Southeast. So just like in Canada, the more specific I think you can get in knowing who they are and where they're from, the more respect that conveys. If you're unsure, it's safer, I think, just to start off at a higher level, asking them if they're Native American, where they grew up, what language their community speaks, what are some of their traditions and ceremonies. And if they're open to talking about all those things, then you'll learn a little bit more. But hopefully this has been helpful for you to learn a little bit more about the terminology for the Indigenous community in Canada and the United States. So if you're having a conversation with someone or you want to learn a little bit more, you know what are the words to use, what are the words to maybe stay away from. If I missed anything, be sure to put it in the comment section below. If you have any other questions that you would like me to answer, also put it in the comment section below or tweet at me on Twitter. Be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be doing more of these videos in the future. I really want to make this a safe space for you to learn. So thank you so much for watching this video, or MAHSI in my Dene language.